Tzadik Zayin Amud Beis 97b. Before continuing the Gemara, I wanted to make some comments about yesterday's Gemara. I promised I would share something from the Rabbi, but before that I just want to make a note that I thought of as we were learning it yesterday, and I think it's correct. Which is, when the Gemara stated the two views, one which said, where am I? One which said that you need tshuva and ma'asim tovim, and the other one who said, the Rabbi Lezer which said tshuva, and Rabbi Yeshua who said, Rabbi Yeshua who said teshuva. Rabbi Lezer said teshuva, and Yeshua said that if there's no teshuva, then God's going to impose a person like Haman, and that'll cause you to do teshuva. So there's two comments to be made. Number one, I think we paid our dues in Haman's, especially in the recent years. I think that's pretty obvious. But putting that aside, it's hard to say these things in hindsight, but at least just talk about it in terms of the theology of what the Gemara is saying, meaning let's not apply it to reality as we've experienced it, but just the Gemara in the theoretical abstract. The Gemara describes a person like Haman that's going to arrive. The reality is that with Haman, he didn't end up executing any of his plans. It was all a theory. So I think this leaves a window to the idea that even Rabbi Yeshua, which says that teshuva is going to be compelled by external forces that aren't necessarily positive, Rabbi Yeshua is leaving it open that hopefully it doesn't come to actual persecution, only the threat of it, like Haman. Perhaps. That's why I said it's hard to put this onto the reality of our existence, in which we've had Hamans who actually did implement their ideas. So I believe we paid our dues in that regard. Okay. Now, as far as that was just a thought that I had yesterday. Welcome to disagree. Okay, that's from the two comments from the Rebbe. Number one is like this. The Rebbe talked about, they would often say when concluding a talk with or just in general talking about Mashiach's arrival, they would say that Mashiach should come lamata ma'asar tvachim, which literally means Mashiach should come under 10 handbreadths, within 10 handbreadths. And explain what does he mean by this? What does he mean? Within 10 handbreadths. Mashiach should come. What's this within 10 handbreadths? So explain like this, that when the Gemara said kolu kol hakitzin, that all the ends are done, all the predictions of the end of Mashiach's coming are done. So the Rebbe basically explained that it could be that the predictions are made in terms of the spiritual progression that happens in some spiritual world towards the arrival of Mashiach. But when the Rebbe is asking for Mashiach to come, he's not asking for the spiritual realm to somehow have been ready for Mashiach to come, but rather it should be here in this literal physical world that Mashiach should arrive, not just in some spiritual accomplishment in the spiritual world, but it actually should be in this reality. And why why lower than 10 handbreadths? Not just not just this physical world. Why adding lower than 10 handbreadths? So he explained like this in Halacha. There's a distinction in Hilchah Shabbos, the laws of Shabbos, that with up to 10 handbreadths from the earth is considered an extension of the earth. Reshus harabim, public domain, right? There's a prohibition against carrying from a private to a public domain. So an object, let's just say it's flying, because it gets complicated when you're talking about a person holding it. But let's just say you threw it. Even when you throw it, because there's a klotek can be shahun chadami or not, all kinds of complicated halacha. But the bottom line is that Reshus harabim does not exist. The public domain does not exist above 10 tefachim. And this is, and again, Hilchah Shabbos, when you're carrying from public domain to private domain, if the object never made it down to the within 10 handbreadths, that gets into machlekes also about whether or not the air is considered to having caught it and brought it to the earth. But does that even apply to above 10 tvachim?
So I could throw a ball from a private to a public domain if it's above 10 handbreadths, and that's okay, and then the person can carry it? No, because once you carry it, you made it land. If it lands on something, then and that thing's attached to the earth. But let's say the theoretical case is, again, there's machlekes about this. I don't want to make a halachic psak, but this is where the theoretical case comes in. If you threw an object from a private domain to a private domain across the street,
and in the center was a public domain. But as it flew, it never came within 10 handbreadths of the earth. And the question becomes whether or not it landed. It's very, very complicated. It goes on for pages and pages in the Gemara, literally pages and pages. And the Gemara goes back and forth whether or not whether the air grabbing the object is considered as if it landed or not, and does it apply to under 10 tefachim, or does it apply to over 10 tefachim, under 3 tefachim? It gets very, very complicated. But the bottom line is that there is a halachic idea that above 10 tefachim is not considered the public domain anymore. That's an accepted reality. The question is how it's practiced. But that's the accepted halachic principle. So you have Reshus HaRabim, you have public domain up until 10 tefachim, and then Reshus HaYachid, singular domain, the above 10 tefachim. And Rabbi explained on the spiritual level, this is something Chassidus talks about all the time, that our job is, and one of the reasons, the spiritual reasons for the prohibition of Shabbos, of carrying on Shabbos, is this idea because on Shabbos, our job is to live in the Reshus HaYachid. Yechidei Shel Olam. Reshus HaYachid, this very literally translated means the singular domain, not the private domain. Yachid means can mean an individual, like an individual's domain, as in private. You know, it's not Reshus HaPrati, which would mean a private domain. It's Reshus HaYachid, which can mean an individual's domain, or it could also mean literally a singular domain, alluding to this idea that it's the domain of the singular of God Himself. Yachid being the singular of God Himself. And on Shabbos, we don't take things. In other words, on Shabbos, we're living in the singular domain. We're living in God's domain, as it were. And if we don't carry out to the public domain, which is the world at large, which is a world of multiplicity and a world of division. Right? Rather, the singular world, Hashem's world, which is all one. And the job, of course, of bringing Mashiach, the job of the Torah mitzvahs, is to make of the Reshus HaRabim, to make of the public domain, the world of separation, division, and publicness. Rabbi also literally translated means multiple. So the multiple domain and the singular domain. Multiple domain being our world, where there's fragmented reality of individuals that are separate one from another, and items that are separate from one from another. And all of those things should be brought into the Yechidus, Shel Olam, should be brought into the singularity of godliness. Right? And therefore, says everybody wants Mashiach to come lower than 10 Tefachim, means into the world of division, separation, where we live, into the Rabbim, into the world of the multiple. And this, I'm sharing this now because they're related this to the idea of Kol HaKitzin, that all the ends have come, in that, in theory, because a lot of these ends already happened. A lot of these ends that the dates that the Gemara describes already happened. And in theory, they could have been some spiritual accomplishments. And the Rebbe is asking that they should be drawn to this physical world and Mashiach should come within 10 Tvachim, as it were. Okay. That's one thing they were commenting on this thing. Another thing they were commenting is like this. I alluded to this yesterday, where the Rebbe asked this question, why Kitzin Lashon Rabin? Why multiple? Why say all the ends have arrived? Just say the end has arrived already. The end, it's one end. Why the ends and multiple? So we explained yesterday, the Rebbe just mentioned this, but it would seem that the simple reading of the Gemara is that the predictions of the end have come to an end. All the predictions are done.
Especially the ones that the Gemara had.
So that's what the Gemara had. But the reality that's in history, there have been more predictions after that. Whether they were right or wrong is not the point, but there were predictions afterwards. The Gemara said in the previous page, and even on this page, admonishing those who try to figure out the end of days, eschatology. But nonetheless, there were many Jews in history who have done that, including great sages and great minds and great tzaddikim.
It's ironic, the Rambam himself, who said you shouldn't do it,
did it himself.
Yes.
Yeah, the Ramban, others. There were many who did this with themselves, right? Not to do it, but they did it themselves also. Yeah. It's almost like this thing that they couldn't hold themselves back. They tried,
Or some say it's for the benefit of people trying to raise their spirits from home.
But then there's the backfire, the Gemara says, because you say it's going to come and it doesn't come, and then everybody says you're done.
That's the Ramban that they get around the issue. It says you have to make a prediction with a disclaimer. I may not be correct, so don't rely on 100%. Then it's different. But if you make a prediction, say it has to come.
And then they've asked another question, which is a Gavaldika question, which is, the people who made predictions, so they wanted Mashiach to be delayed all the way to that time? Well, why are you making a prediction? A lot of the predictions were like centuries in advance. Like Mashiach's going to come in how many years? Sorry?
You can come anytime.
Yeah, but the Gemara here is citing people who gave specific dates in the future. So they were trying to delay Mashiach. What were they doing? This is the Gavaldik question. It's like such an obvious question that, like, why is nobody asking it? Everybody used to say this a lot of times, that sometimes the obvious questions people don't ask. Very, very often they would ask questions. They would say the simplest questions. They would call it klotz kasha. Like a klotz kasha means almost like a borderline foolish question. So obvious. Sorry.
Wasn't that why Yaakov was held back from saying when the end of days would be? Because
people would think we
despair
because how long
ahead it would just depress everyone.
It's one of the reasons, yeah. So similar thing. And first of all, to depress people. Number two, why would you be delaying Mashiach? Why would you say that? Why would you say Mashiach is coming in 100 years from now? Why? Like, what are you trying to do? And Deborah answers both questions like this. Sorry? Not a real morale booster, yeah. Tell people, oh, by the way, maybe your great-grandchildren will see it. Like, come on.
Maybe.
Yeah, like it's 100 years, 150 years. Because it might even be wrong anyway, right? Deborah connects this to a larger talk he's giving there with respect to the Rechush Gadol, which is the great wealth that the Jews came out of Egypt with, right? They were promised before they went into Egypt, later they'll go out with great wealth.
Also promised 400 years, by the way.
Sorry?
400 years as well, they were promised that.
They promised that, but it was cut down.
But they knew it was 400 years, they don't know when it starts. So they were told that the Torah doesn't give dates itself.
Yeah. There's a few different, it's not just that they didn't know when it starts, there's also Koshi Ashibud.
No,
there's different explanations.
400 years. It was 400 years. It could have been from the birth of Yitzchak. Could have been from.
I'm saying, but there are other biurim. There are other explanations which say that it wasn't a different time start, but it was koshi ashibud. The difficulty of how bad it was accelerated the time. But anyway,
you could take the koshi ashibud, made the shortened years of Mitzrayim, still 400 years. 400 years has to be. But the question, what's the starting point? That's koshi ashibud, tshuva, all these factors come into play.
Anyway, so Rabbi is talking about a larger talk about the Rechush Gadol, about the great wealth, and how it played out on different levels. Which means it wasn't just like there was one singular amount of one time all Jews got wealth and that was it. There were levels. Most identifiably was the wealth they took out of Egypt after the plague of darkness. Right, the plague of darkness, they identified the wealth, and then when they left Egypt, they took it. And number two was the wealth they got, Bizas Hayam, which is when after the sea split, they took a lot of the wealth, the spoils they took then as well. So over there indicates that there's levels of Rechush Gadol, of great wealth. And Rebbe translates that to Mashiach's coming on a spiritual level. Meaning to say, Mashiach's arrival, as we've been describing based on Chassidus, and Kabbalah, and how our world of exile is a slow progression in which the Jews are making, make certain accomplishments or arrive at certain landmarks over history, and each of these things, each of the accomplishments, is another step towards Mashiach's coming. Writing the Mishnah and the Gemara and then Shulchan Aruch and then Ardizal and then Chassidus and coming and etc. Each of these things are another stage in Mashiach's coming. So it says there, but just like the Rechush Gadol, the great wealth that they left from Egypt was in levels. So too the accomplishment of Mashiach's coming is in levels. And that's pshat kitzin in the plural. That's what kitzin means in the plural. As in there are multiple accomplishments that Jews would need to accomplish, so to speak, for Mashiach's arrival. And therefore all the people who talked about, this is what Rebbe says, the people who talked about the end of days being at a certain time, they weren't saying that Mashiach has to come on that date and no earlier. They were expressing, based on the Shoresh Lishmasam, based on the spiritual source of where their soul comes from, based on their soul personality type, if you will, it seemed to them that Jews would need to accomplish a certain accomplishment for Mashiach to come. And that's what the date is. The date isn't that it has to be on that date. It could happen earlier. And they definitely hoped it came earlier. They're waiting for him to come every day. But they were stating what they felt was the Rechush Gadol, what was the great accomplishment that Jews needed to get from Mashiach to come. And in fact, especially in...
it still wouldn't come until that date then.
Well, unless it was accomplished, unless it was accomplished earlier. Unless we accomplished it earlier, right?
So it means the normal way will come this way. But
right, but you need
to do more work, it'll come earlier.
That's correct. Yeah. That's correct. So in other words, there's an accomplishment that happens at this date, but you could get that accomplishment earlier, hopefully.
If you do the work that
that's right.
Much involved, yeah.
That's correct. And if the Gemara is saying kol kitzin, the Gemara is saying is that all of the things that Jews need to accomplish for Mashiach to come are already set in motion. And now it's a question of teshuvah ma'asim tovim to bring it happen earlier. In other words, there's no new accomplishments that are going to arrive from Mashiach for Jews that need to accomplish, that Jews will need to accomplish. They already are set in motion. The question is teshuvah ma'asim tovim to get it to happen earlier. And in fact, especially in Hasidic thought, this is true, that there is a lot of these kitzin, these dates in which there was predictions for Mashiach that were going to come, Jews made accomplishments in those times. That's why I asked. There was a date that we once gave, and I asked what happened in that date. And you told me the Gemara was printed. All right? What was the date? Remember?
Yeah, because it's 4291, something like that.
No, the Gemara was printed, right? So I said then when we get to hear, it might help.
No, that's fine.
Because that's right. In other words, the Gemara.
This is opportune time.
That's right. Yeah. It was a major like national accomplishment in another stage towards Mashiach's coming, and that's a kates. That's a kates. The Chassidim even said this about a certain date that was predicted as a ketz, and somebody asked, I think it was the third Rebbe, because the kates, the date was during the Alter Rebbe's lifetime, during the first Rebbe's lifetime, and somebody asked the third Rebbe, look, what happened? So the third Rebbe said, that year, look what the Torah was printed, which means a certain monumental work of the Alter Rebbe, and Chassidus was published during that time, during that year. In other words, that was like a kates, that was another monumental stage in the development of Mashiach's coming.
With a brick in the wall.
The brick in the wall. Yeah. So this is the way there was learning this kolu kol kitzin in the plural, and why there's all the different dates in general, like were they all wrong? Rebbe doesn't ask this question, but you could ask the question that if they were all wrong, back up a second. Every part of Torah is part of Torah. And if it's part of Torah, it's 100% true. Like the famous line goes, Akashim Torah is Eichet Torah. The question Torah is also Torah. What's the proof? That if you woke up in the morning and all you wanted to learn was the Gemara's question, you would have to make the bracha of learning Torah before. The Rabbi Levi, the Rebbe's takes it even further. That when the Gemara says a statement, Badusahi, which means the Gemara sometimes makes a statement, or Gemara quotes a Brisa or a Mishnah, and then tries to analyze it to make it fit with some other texts, and the Gemara comes to the conclusion without any choice, saying that there must be a recorded wrong. Whoever transcribed it got the words wrong, and you must change the words. Mishabash is one actually where they got it wrong. Badusa is even worse, where the whole thing is where the whole thing they throw out the whole text. Badusa, the whole thing was made up. It was a mistaken text. Mishabash means you have to change a word. Badusa is even worse, which is the whole thing thrown out. But in Torah, if you decided to learn just that mistaken brisa, that mistaken text, which the Gemara later is going to declare mistaken, and you decide to learn just that, you still also have to make a bracha on Torah. Which means even the mistaken text, because it's quoted in the Gemara, says the Rabbi Levi, the father says that it was given at Moshe at Sinai.
Because Morgan left it out. Exactly,
no. The Gemara puts it in.
Exactly. Why put it in? Exactly.
That's right, which means it came from Sinai also. It's also a valid. That's correct. To learn from it. So I'm taking this and adding it to these Gemaras here also. But the Gemara gives all these dates. And even though the Gemara comes to the end and says you guys were all wrong, but the dates were put in. And the Gemara quotes them. Which means it's part of Torah. Which means even if they weren't the final dates, they have some element of truth in that they are a final date. And based on what we just explained from the Rebbe, it makes perfect sense. And that these dates were actually significant dates in Jewish history, which Jews made significant accomplishments that are part and parcel of the Mashiach's coming. Elsewhere, the Rebbe highlights the Alter Rebbe's famous words in the beginning of chapter 37 in Tanya. In chapter 36, the Alter Rebbe describes what Mashiach looks like. That the presence of Hashem is revealed here in this world, there, but the dwelling place down here is explained at length, but it's first elucidated in chapter 36. And then the beginning of chapter 37, Alter Rebbe says, now this ultimate accomplishment of Mashiach's coming is totally dependent on Ma'aseinu v'Avodaseinu, in our work and our service. The Rebbe's father, and then the Rebbe explains what the difference between work and service means. Ma'aseh and Avodah, Seinu v'Avodaseinu, kol meshech zman hagolus, throughout all the length of the days of exile. Meaning, it's not just the last generation that did it, but kol meshech zman hagolus, all the length of the days of exile, we're all slowly building towards this thing. And therefore each of these kits and each of these dates, which made significant accomplishments in Jewish history, are part and parcel of Mashiach's coming. I just conclude with thought with a vart I heard, which I read from I think it's in Maral. In explaining, it's in Haggadah, where we say, let me see if I get it right. I know the end vart, but I have to remember where I applied it to. I think it's in Halach Ma'anya. Oh, yes, in Halach Ma'anya. In Halach Ma'anya we say, then we were slaves. Next year we'll be in Jerusalem. We'll be free, and then next year in Jerusalem.
Here now we're here in Babel. Next year we're two things.
So he basically explains what's the big difference. In both cases, we're anyways enslaved. I could be getting this wrong, but this is the basic idea. So the big difference is like this. in Egypt, when there was a predestined date, there's nothing they can do about it coming in earlier. Is a very deep state of despair. There's a very deep state of despair because nothing you can do to get the thing done, to make the redemption happen. But from the fact that Lashon Haba Yerushalayim, the fact that the next year I'll be in Jerusalem, and the next year I'll be in Jerusalem is actually up to me. He quotes the Gemara. It's like pas b'saloi. He has bread in his basket already. The Gemara said that a person who has no bread in his basket is hungrier than the person who has bread in his basket, even though we both ate. Even though we both ate at the same time before, because I know I can eat, because I have bread in my basket, I'm less hungry than the one who doesn't have bread in his basket, even though it's possible that he might bump into food and eat before me. But his hunger is deeper, right? In other words, because the burden of our exile is lighter, knowing that we can be part and parcel of Mashiach's coming. This is basically what he says, and then he connects it to the halach ma'anya, because one of the mitzvahs that bring Mashiach, the Gemara to bring Mashiach, is tzedakah, it's charity. And here I am making an announcement. Anybody who's hungry, come and eat. So I'm stating, in my very act of inviting guests to my shop, to my table, I am being part and parcel of Lashon Haba Yerushalayim. The next year I'll be in Jerusalem. Right? And echoing this theme that every act is not disconnected from Mashiach's coming, but actually part and parcel of the building of it, unless you have multiple kits and multiple ends, because multiple accomplishments that are part of the process of Mashiach's coming. So this is Rebbe's Varta with a little elaboration. Sorry? Okay.
Which moment you said Hashem will send Mashiach? If he's not capable, he will take over up to 10,000 years. Remember?
Okay.
No, that's not 10,000. No.
All right. Let's learn the Gemara a little bit.
10,000 is the Gemara. It means that the different ways Mashiach can come. If there's no man, then Hashem will have to intervene. That's in Isaiah.
Okay. Let's look at the Gemara here. All right. So the Gemara continues like this, and the Gemara now gives us an elaborated version of this text before. The text before was a dispute between Eliezer and Yeshua, whether Mashiach comes through Teshuvah, and that's what it's waiting for. We're waiting for Teshuvah, or like Rabbi Eliezer, which said,
Rabbi Yeshua says,
or like Rabbi Yeshua, which said that either the Jews do Teshuvah willingly, or God will manipulate the world and bring the Jews to a state where they're going to bring Mashiach. But they're going to do Teshuvah and bring Mashiach. He says through a year, but actually the Psukim he quotes later, Ladavka come through a year. The basic difference being whether Mashiach comes from below to above, where the Jews initiate the Teshuvah, or Mashiach comes from above to below, where God initiates and prods the dude to do Teshuvah, or maybe some combination of both, but that the Gemara doesn't explicitly state. So the Gemara is now going to bring the elaborated version of that same conversation. The Rebbe actually connects it to a different machlekes. Maybe tomorrow we'll talk about that. The Rebbe connects this dispute here of Eliezer and Yeshua to another dispute about when they had Eliezer and Yeshua. These two people also argue when Mashiach is going to come, in the month of Nisan or the month of Tishrei. The Rebbe connects that dispute to this dispute as to whether it's going to be initiated by the Jew, which is the model of Tishrei. Tishrei is Anila Deidi. I am my beloved. The Jew turns to God, and then Deidi Li, God responds. Whereas Nisan is Nigla Le Melech Melech Baruch Hu. Nisan is God reveals Himself. So Nisan, the month of Nisan, Pesach, is the model of above to below. Tishrei is the model from below to above. And those two opinions is when Mashiach is going to come. Nisan or Tishrei, below to above to below, line up exactly with this dispute here, whether Mashiach comes from the Jew doing Teshuvah, or God prods the Jew to Teshuvah, coming from above to below. Okay. And that's apropos because we're coming towards Tishrei. So let's learn the Gemara. We have a few minutes, but let's just begin. Let's Yefshir v'lei klum. Can't get it without learning any Gemara. Tanya idach. We've learned in another brisa, another text. The last line of the words of Eliezer, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines from the bottom of the page. Fourth to last word. Tanya idach, we taught in another brisa. Rabbi Eliezer said, Im Yisrael is in Teshuvah, if Jews do Teshuvah and they go and they get redeemed. We're waiting from the below to above movement where the Jew initiates Teshuvah. Otherwise, finished, we're waiting. That's the Tishrei model. That's right. As the verse reads, says Eliezer, Shuvu banim shovavim, return, O children who are like lost, or and then I will heal your dwellings. In other words, first the Jew got to return, and then God says, I will heal.
In response.
In response. So the Jew has to initiate. And then the Gemara is going to go back and forth with different verses that imply different ways. So we'll see. Rabbi Shua says, but there's a verse which says, you've been sold off freely, talking about the Jews' exile, and you will not be redeemed by buying your way out. So says the Gemara. Says Rabbi Shua and explain what does this mean, that you were sold for free and you can't buy your way out. So says the Gemara, you've been sold out freely in your behavior in serving idols back in the day. When the verse says you will not buy your way out through money, it doesn't mean literal money, but you won't be able to buy your way out just by doing teshuvah and ma'asim tovim. God's got to do it. You can't just buy your way out, spiritually speaking. I haven't seen this, which is surprising. Well, not surprising, I didn't look everywhere, but I haven't seen this, but it's possible. The word kesef means also lichsaif, to pine. So it's like teshuvah. Kesef, which means money, also means to pine, to yearn. So lebe kesef to galu, not with your pining and yearning will you get out of exile. You got to wait for God to do it. Okay, so one verse this way that says God responds to the Jew. Next verse which says, sorry, you got to wait for God to do it.
What's interesting is there's a contradiction they say before. Even Rabbi Shua agrees to some kind of tshuva.
That's right. That's true.
Even tshuva
correct. This Bryce is a little bit different than the previous Gemara. That's true. That's why I said it could be God prodding you to do teshuvah. But anyway.
Yeah. But meaning, it seems there's no tshuva according to this way it literally reads.
Yeah. We could give a positive twist on this in that Rabbi Lezer is saying that the revelation of Mashiach is such a high level of revelation that it's something you can't even reach. In other words, a Jew initiates and he elicits divine revelation, then the revelation that comes is limited and matching to the investiture that the Jew put in. But it's possible that Rabbi Lezer is saying that certainly your teshuvah is going to help. We might be able to say this. But the divine revelation of Mashiach is going to be so lofty that it's nothing you can buy. Meaning it's so lofty, it's nothing you can reach. Maybe to give a little positive twist on this. Perhaps.
No, the Rashi says it literally, yeah.
Yeah, no, I know that. Rashi says. I'm just giving like a little Hasidic layer. Yeah, no teshuvah. Yeah. Anyway, I'm suggesting a little deeper explanation to give some positive side to it.
Because even the Torah itself, you have two contradictory passages. You have one in Hazino, which is there's like no hope for the Jews. Hashem has to intervene. You have the parsha of Tshuva and Nitzavim.
Right.
The Torah itself has these two opinions.
Yeah.
And the thing there's no
reconciliation.
That's
what I'm suggesting. There could be two levels. In other words, the Jew does teshuvah and he elicits a divine response. But then there's an even deeper level of divine revelation, which is nothing you can accomplish. It's so high that whatever you do, you can't buy it with money. In other words, that's such a high level of revelation. I understand. I'm giving a different.
The Radak reconciles it to us. His view is at different stages. So we can go through one stage of Hazino. And then
what I'm telling you first perfectly, there's one stage where we elicit the revelation of God that is a response to what we've done. At a deeper stage, it's such a high level that it's not even.
His goes worse. It's so bad that Hashem has to.
Okay, I'm trying to give a positive.
And then, as a result of the
anyway,
then people do tshuva like on their own afterwards.
Yeah, I'm trying to give a positive way of looking at it. Okay, so says the Gemara. The Gemara is going to go back and forth with verses like this. Rabbi Lezer says back to Yeshua. Rabbi Lezer responds to Yeshua. Okay, but it already says in the pasuk, Shuvah Elai, return, O people, unto me, says God. Vashuvah Lechem, then I will return to you. So first the Jew has to do teshuvah. Rabbi Yeshua responds, but I have a different verse. And back and forth with different verses. But the verse already says, Ki anochi. It's the continuation of the previous verse. Ki anochi ba'alti v'chem. For I have Baltis, it's like a negative term. Where is it? Well, no, I have taken you to myself. Yeah, it's like I married you. And I have taken you. Echad me'ir. I'll take you one from a city, v'shnayim mishpacha, and two from a family. And I'll bring you into Zion. As if to say, by force. God's going to decide to take you when He wants, whether you like it or not. Okay. Then Amalei Lezer responds, but you have a different verse which says, B'shuva v'nachas tushun, through your repentance and through pleasantries, your salvation will come. As if to say, it's going to come in response to your repentance.
And also very pleasant as well.
And pleasantly, not by force. Yeah, so Amalei Lezer responds back to live. We have a verse somewhere else which says, Kaya Hashem, such says God, Goyal Yisrael v'kadoshoi, the Redeemer of Israel and its Holy One, and its holiness. I mean, the Holy One, blessed be He. Leviza nefesh, to who is despised of man, L'misayev Goyen, who is abhorred of the nations, Le'eved Moshe, to a servant rulers, to a servant of rulers, Malachim Yiru, King shall see and arise, V'kumu and get up, Sardim Ishtachavu, and kings and princes will prostrate themselves before Hashem, who will faithfully take the Jews out of Egypt, out of exile, indicating that Mashiach comes when God decides.
And also will be
God's saying, I'm going to do it. You like it, don't like it, I'm going to do it to you.
Also will initially be looked down upon, will be like persecuted and so on,
yeah.
Explained, but eventually will be honored by the king.
Rabbi Lezer responds to him, well, like finding, but the verse already says, if the Jews will return in the name of God, Eli Toshiv, unto me return, implying not forced above to below, but initiation from below to above from the Jew. Amalei Rabbi Shua is going back and forth. Amalei Rabbi Shua, and Rabbi Shua responds back to him. The verse already says, "Ve'esma she'ish lavush habadim," and I heard, or I will hear the man dressed in a white sheets, right? Just lavush habadim.
Yeah, wearing linen.
Yeah, like white linen, like a purity. Where is it? Now I'm looking for the translation here. Clothing linen and Hashem Rimal Lemim Ya'ar, who hovers above the waters of the Nile. The Yarim Yamina, and he'll raise up his right hand, the Smiling and left hand to the heavens, the Yishba B'chai Olam, and he'll swear on the life of the world, and God himself, Ki L'moyed Moyedim, for the time of times, the Chatzi and a half, the time of times and a half. The Chachalois, and when the ending comes, Nafetz Yad, he'll stretch out his hands, Am Kodesh, to the holy people, Techlena, and they'll be consumed, Kol El, all of these, implying that God's forcibly going to arrive with his hands up in the air and sweep the people out of exile, implying that it does not require any initiation from the Jew below.
Actually, it's very the same thing will be shveiling the moed.
Yeah, the Jews will be in a desolate, in
such a low level that there'll be like, apparently no hope. And then Hashem has to intervene.
Says the Gemara at this point, the Shosek Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer was quiet. That's it. The conversation ended. Back and forth. No reconciliation. The truth is that one could, first of all, there's no doubt that these psukim back and forth each indicate layer after layer. Each one's, in other words, why not just lay out all your psukim to begin with, and then lay out all your counter psukim, and that's it. They're always back and forth, pasuk, as if to say we're climbing higher and higher levels in terms of what God is doing, or lower levels. I don't know. But also, perhaps you can even say that if you look at our generation, literally, one can look at it in two ways. One can look at our generation and say it's the great generation of assimilation. One could say that of our generation. And at the same time, one could say of our generation that it's the great renaissance of Teshuvah.
And they're both.
And they're both true, right? And with God's help, the perspective that we're a generation of Teshuvah will far outweigh the other perspective, and we'll go, like he says here, b'shuva v'nachas, with return calmly, like the pasuk says. Unlike Egypt, we have to run out of Egypt because we were escaping evil. When Mashiach comes, we'll go calmly, happily, joyfully, every Jew hand in hand with Hashem. May it happen without delay. Have a wonderful day, everybody.